Welcome to Building Healthy Relationships, the 4 Habits podcast, helping you enjoy better harmony at home, thrive at work, and win at life. Here are your hosts, Dr. Andrea and Jon Taylor-Cummings, recognized authorities on the subjects of improving work relationships and cultures, as well as couple and home relationships.
Well, hello and a warm welcome to our guests around the world. This is the next in the series of the 4 Habits podcast. Again, we're delighted to have a special guest with us. Warm welcome to Harriet Steel. Harriet, thank you for making the time to be with us this morning.
Well, thank you both for inviting me.
So we're really looking forward to the conversation. It's going to be around women and especially somebody as high profile and senior in their career as Harriet, and the relationships that have supported you in getting to building the career that you have. So really looking forward to unpacking that conversation together. But before we do, we need to give you the proper introduction. So Jon's going to share the bio with us.
Absolutely. And when Andrea said a senior woman in the industry, in financial services, you'll see what I mean when I go through the profile. So Harriet is a partner and head of global clients at Pemberton. She joined Pemberton in April 2023. So at the time of recording, that's just over a year today.
Yeah, so happy anniversary.
Happy anniversary. So Harriet leads the development of the client business globally and oversees business development, investor relations, marketing, communications, and sustainable investing. Prior to joining Pemberton, she was the head of business development international at Federated Hermes, where she spent 11 years and served as a member of the executive committee and a board director of the international business. Her commercial leadership was key to the transformation of Hermes from its origins as the internal asset manager of British Telecom pension scheme to an independent investment management business serving more than 800 institutional and distribution clients globally. Her contribution to the growth of the business led to the successful sale of Hermes Investment Management to Federated Investors, to become Federated Hermes, as it did in 2020. And so Harriet brings with her over 30 years' experience in financial services, talk about senior in this space, including senior client roles in capital markets, hedge funds, and private equity. And she has a bachelor's degree in architecture, interestingly, from Princeton University. So that's a bit about Harriet. Impressive background. I've known Harriet for a number of years now and seen her operate in this space. And I just know that there's so many interesting insights that she's going to be able to share with us on this podcast.
Yeah, so we really, want to jump straight into the conversation, Harriet. And it's interesting, from architecture at Princeton to, making serious waves in the financial industry. Tell us a little bit about that journey and the passion that drives you for the change that you want to see through the work that you're doing.
Yeah, they don't seem like sort of natural bedfellows, do they? Sort of, starting out wanting to be an architect and ending up in finance.
Always a story behind it.
I don't know what you're going to be designing and building, huh?
But it is about building. So it's about building and it's about transformation and it's about creation. So I've always been a very creative person. And I remember back at school when I had to choose what's called in the UK A-levels. There are public exams and you only get to choose 3 subjects and you have to choose those at the age of 15 or 16. I think it's 15 when you have to choose them. And I just loved all my subjects and I wanted to do everything and I didn't want to have to choose 3 subjects. I remember saying, well, when I had to whittle it down, it came down to maths and physics and English and art. And I remember my tutor saying, but you can't do those because I just don't understand why you'd want to do that combination of subjects. Because
why art in there?
Yeah, well, I loved art, and why? How can you do that? It doesn't work with the scheduling system at the school. And I said, but I really want to do these subjects. She said, but don't be ridiculous. What career would you have with that combination of subjects? And I literally just thought about it logically, and said architecture. it covers all of that. So that's how that came about. Subsequently I read books like The Fountainhead, which was a popular book at the time, and then became obsessed about the idea of being an architect. And needless to say, I got to Princeton, where there were many more talented budding architects, and realized I was never going to be the best in that field. It was a sort of very humbling experience. And like a lot of people, I guess, of my generation, I can't say it was by design that I ended up in financial services. It was more by default, because that's, that was a time of huge growth in financial services, and particularly over here in the UK, where post Big Bang, the city had been somewhat deregulated to allow a lot of the large American institutions to come in. So it was a period of huge expansion, and the banks were just going around and sucking up as many graduates, and it seemed
Bright,
to be quite a lot
talented graduates.
yeah, that they could. So I ended up there by default, and but was very sort of curious about this whole world. I knew absolutely nothing about it, and started work on the trading floor at Bankers Trust, and realized, very quickly, this is great fun. It's like a continuation of college, and except they pay you. And I worked with, lots of incredibly bright and fun and ambitious people of similar age, the same age. And it really did feel a bit like a continuation of college. What I was very lucky about there and this was, again, completely by accident. I didn't choose Bankers Trust. It somehow just chose me. But I couldn't have ended up in a better place in financial services at that time.
Yep.
And not just because they were at the forefront of innovation in terms of new derivative structures, etc. But it was because they actually had a very deliberate initiative to increase senior female representation in the business and female representation generally. It was actually a strategy of the bank.
That's huge foresight, because we're talking about,
early 90s, yeah.
Early 90s.
90s,
That's really avant-garde in the way that they were thinking from way back then.
I hadn't realized we had a similar connections back then, because when I joined Credit Suisse back in the day in CS First Boston, the team that set up financial products had just come from Bankers Trust, I think, to come and set that up. The Alan Wheat and the guys,
Yes,
absolutely.
That's right. Yeah. And then
I'm just making that connection as you're talking there.
Yeah, and he hired Mark Katimsky, who then subsequently tried to hire me from Bankers Trust into Credit Suisse. I never ended up going, but
we'd have worked in the same team back then if you had.
Yes, exactly. But I'll tell you an interesting story about the female representation. So they did succeed very well at that. There was, I had senior female role models. The first group that I worked in, the partner that ran it was a woman, Lucy Rinaldi. I'll never forget her, amazing woman. When Bankers Trust was eventually bought by Deutsche Bank in 1998, and recently I bumped into a very senior woman who runs the whole client business for DWS, Rofin Kuppers. And she had been a managing director at Deutsche Bank at the time of that acquisition. And she said to me, it was amazing when the acquisition happened. I was no longer there. I'd moved on to Morgan Stanley. But when the acquisition happened, they decided it'd be a good idea to get the senior women together, because women are good at building bonds and connecting and building relationships. So let's get the managing directors from both sides, from Deutsche Bank and from Bankers Trust, together. And she said at Deutsche Bank, it was a much larger bank, and there was just this small handful of them. And they pitched up to the party, and there was just a very large number. They were outnumbered by 5 to 1 from what had been a much smaller global workforce. And they could not believe how many female managing directors there were at that point at Bankers Trust. So that strategy
That
did play
visual,
out. It
and
sounded
that
like
visual
it.
brought it alive there to them, eh? To just
Yeah.
see the
See
proportions
the
there.
numbers.
Wow.
And I can see how that start would have really put you on a very strong trajectory to believe what you could achieve in financial services. But you ended up at the hard edge of banking or of the financial services in sales and business development. And, if ever there's a core function that's the place to be in financial services, it's in sales and business development. And you're leading and creating those functions. How did that happen? What got
Mm.
you into sales, business development, such a forefront position, and how did you find it as a woman?
Yes. So again, it was going back to my very early career at Bankers Trust. Everyone joins, everyone's made to be a trader. It was predominantly a proprietary trading house at the time, so I did that training. But there was also a parallel strategy in addition to the let's increase female representation. There was a parallel strategy, which is let's increase our client business, right?
Mhm.
Let's turn what is a risky activity, proprietary trading, into something that delivers a much higher return on a risk-adjusted basis,
Absolutely.
client business, where there's some transaction risk when you're transacting with clients, but at the end of the day, you're building a franchise and you're getting paid fees. So that was a strategy, and they decided to look for people, within the bank that they thought could build relationships with clients that could explain sort of complicated things in simple and simple ways that clients could understand. We were selling sometimes quite complex and innovative derivative products. So that's
Absolutely.
how I ended up in sales, and I enjoyed it a great deal because, again, I enjoyed building relationships with those clients and creating something. When you think of a client franchise, and you start to see the results of that as that grows and as you build it. So that's how I started in sales. I actually enjoy the process. My job now is very different. So the job through Hermes and now at Pemberton, what you realize is, you're a one-to-one salesperson and you have your sales targets, and then you might be running a small team, and then as you move into bigger and bigger jobs, and at Hermes, I was running 130 people at one point across a range of different functions. You work out the broader ecosystem that goes to support successful sales, right?
Yeah.
And it's not just about sales. The sales guys, they're the glory. They wear the glory. They get the medals. They get the big paychecks.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, their success is reliant on a much broader infrastructure, right? It's
Right.
reliant
Yeah.
on setting the right sales strategy. It's reliant on having the right marketing and branding support. It's reliant on having the right product prioritization and the right value proposition that comes to market. And all of those things have to work hand in glove. And so as I evolved and got more grown up and took on bigger and more grown up roles, the strategic part of that I started to find incredibly satisfying. So putting all of the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together, working out what were the key roles, and then hiring well into those roles. And again, that comes down to people and empowering those people and trusting those people to deliver, trusting that you've hired the right people, giving them the accountability, because people thrive when they're empowered and they have that accountability. So that's what I enjoy. So there's I love the leadership element of it, which is not managing people per se. You want to set people up for success. You have business heads who have to, they have to manage their team. You have to manage them, but really it's more about leading once you get up to the bigger jobs.
Once you've created all the structure.
Yeah, and as you're rightly saying, building the infrastructure to make it happen. Because I remember back to my my Merrill Lynch days, where I knew that if you're calling from Merrill Lynch, I could call basically the CEO of any organization and they take my call. You're calling
Yes.
from a known brand, but because the brand has been built.
Yes.
You're calling from a new name. Like, why am I speaking to this person? So your job at the moment, it sounds like, is to just build that brand, the
Yes.
whole machinery around it, so that when they do pick up the phone or they get on the other end of an email or whatever, the person will take their call.
Yes.
I
Yes.
love
You've obviously got to deliver on the short-term objectives at the same time. So it is a balancing act.
Yes, and I love what you said from the beginning with Bankers Trust, their insight into the particular skills that women bring in general, not all, but, in general, around being able to build bonds, create good relationships, be more collaborative. How have you found the different cultures that you've worked in, kind of empowering that or not? What's your experience?
So yeah, that's a really good question. I think that when you think about cultures, what is culture?
Mm.
Culture is just a collection of behaviors, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And the richest environments culturally are those where you have real diversity there, but diversity that's able to work harmoniously,
Correct.
towards
Yeah.
a common
Mhm.
goal. I think, if I look back on my own career journey, you look when you start out, when you're really young, and you're really, really naive to this concept of, people in the workplace and relationships.
And politics.
And politics, right? So the external part that we've just talked about in terms of building relationships with clients is actually much simpler and much more straightforward. They might not all be people that are like you or think like you, but you've got a very pure objective, which is to understand those people and to deliver. But then if you look at the internal hodgepodge,
Mhm.
and it's a much more sort of complex infrastructure of people and different ambitions and different ways of thinking and different, sort of social and cultural backgrounds and all the rest of it. That's the bit that when you're young, you completely underestimate. You're naive to it. You've
Yeah.
grown up in the sort of, bosom of your family, and, all families have their problems. Not all families are straightforward. But saying that, it's a very consistent set of values that are surrounding you. And,
Yes.
for better or for worse, you have a familiarity and you learn how to navigate what's essentially a controlled environment.
Yeah.
And then you start at school and uni, and you go through where you have to interact with much broader sets of people, and you build your groups of friends, and that's largely self-selecting, right?
Mhm.
And so you tend to sort of migrate to people who've been brought up with similar value
Similar.
systems and interests and energy or whatever it is, and you're on your sports team or you're in your maths class. And you gravitate and you realize what is self-selected. And, you have your lumps and bumps through school and you have your fallings out and you sometimes get bullied and, all of this. And you have to learn that. But you end up, and especially as you get a bit older and more mature at university, it's a very self-selecting group. And
Correct, yeah.
university is a very precious time because you're, surrounded by, lots of fun, curious, smart people, and you quickly converge around. You find a lot of, a lot of, shared values,
Yeah.
interests,
Similarities. Yeah.
intellectual pursuits, all the rest of it. Very, very valuable time in building those relationships. But it doesn't prepare you for what you face when you come out, even in something as homogenous as financial
Yeah.
services, and it is homogenous. They were hiring from the same universities, the same academic profiles. So a relatively homogenous group, very
Yeah.
multicultural, very international, but very homogenous from a sort of educational experience
Yeah.
background.
Yeah.
And so but even then you realize, wow, you're naive in that you think it's going to be as easy as it was when you were at university and you could self-select those groups, right?
Yes.
So of course you build friendships from work where you're self-selecting those subsets and groups, but you actually have to work and operate both
With
up and down
everybody.
the
And
Yeah.
organization.
the agenda.
And that you are not prepared for that. And
Yeah.
so that's the first bit. You're like, well, why doesn't everyone like me? Or
Yeah.
where are they coming from? And, it's you have this awakening about it. They should be my friends. Then you go through phase 2 as you advance in your career, where you're like, they're not my friends. They're not my friends. This is just purely transactional, right?
Yeah.
You become a bit more ruthless. You get
Yeah.
hardened, you get scarred.
Uh-huh.
And so you move to, a more, and this is just my journey, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And you have to deal at a higher level with politics. And then I think as you get older and more mature, and particularly when, you're empowered and you're in leadership positions and you're having to manage dynamics within your team, you realize it's all about relationships, actually. And that you've also got some more stories along the way where you've managed to resolve conflict, or, what you thought was just, how can they not see things the way I'm thinking?
Hmm.
You've learned how to sort of overcome those tribal instincts, right?
Instincts. Absolutely. Yeah.
And to and to recognize that, a business, and especially when you understand, the different components and functions in a business, and the different mindsets that go to make up the strengths that deliver in those
Correct. Yeah.
different parts of a business, that you actually have to, it is a requisite if you want to end up in a senior leadership position, to work out how to understand different mindsets, different ways of thinking, different viewpoints, and that it's much deeper than just an intellectual argument, right? It's much deeper than, this is my logic, I think we should do things this way. It's really about understanding at the core where this is coming from, right?
Yeah.
And the more work you do as a team leader, and if you take career development seriously and you do the work, and I know people can get skeptical about the endless amounts of training, but actually things like understanding even something as simple as Myers-Briggs, when you see very different mindsets and personality types, and why those are strengths in certain roles, and you'll profile your whole sales team and it'll be quite homogenous, but if you were to go and profile the finance team, it would look very different. And so the further you develop in their career and the higher you go up in an organization, you start to understand the different parts of the ecosystem. And then it comes to being, treating those interactions, even when it looks on the surface like it might be starting from a position of conflict, being, and I think I'm going to plagiarize one of your phrases, being curious, and open
Love it.
to
Yeah.
Yes.
understanding. And, that only comes with maturity, I think, because,
Yeah.
when I was younger, I just, why is everyone around me an idiot, right? That's, I think that's a famous book, but,
Exactly.
it's
There's a book about that.
because you're only looking at things through,
Yeah, exactly.
your tiny microscopic view of the world through your lens.
Yeah, which we assume is the world, and everybody else is weird.
Yeah, we've had that
You
conversation.
could be the poster child for the work that we do and the importance of knowing how to do relationships well, especially when you encounter difference in approach and beliefs and so on, because ultimately everything in business is done through an interaction with somebody else. As much as we talk about AI and automation and computers taking over, for real work to be done, you need people involved, and getting along with people, interacting well, especially when they come from a different point, is so important.
Yes.
I'm backing up to the when you were speaking about the journey, as you say, going in from everybody's initially friends and then they're not friends, and then you have to be higher level, more strategic. It just reminded me of my journey so much, and I won't say which organization. I'll protect the not so
I
innocent.
think I know the
But
one you're talking about.
well, lots of organizations out there, but certainly some, even in my early career, joining some organizations where the knives were out. I'm like, what on earth? What's this about? I had no idea what was going on.
I'm a nice person, really.
Exactly,
You just
a
don't
nice
know me.
person with pure objectives. Why are you imputing that I'm coming in here to take you, to pull the rug from under your feet or something? I wasn't doing any of that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
anyway, but in organizations, there are relationships at different levels. So you have clearly there's peer relationships, there's managing up, and there's managing down if you've got a team there, and the dynamics are all different. How have you found that journey, or which do you find most challenging in that, and how have you managed to sort of work through
Challenges and
challenges to get people on
relationships. Yeah.
side?
Yes. I think the mark of a person. So there's more people that are good at managing up than managing down. I think,
Yeah.
managing up is about it's about you. It's about your, one viewpoint. It's about your survival. It's about your
Yeah.
advancement. And so people do take that very seriously because, there's an immediate cause and effect.
Yes.
And then I think the more challenging ones are managing across, and the mark of a person is how they manage down as well.
Yeah.
And how they manage down in moments of stress or pressure, or general corporate anxiety, or instability or fear, or in those more adverse, those moments of adversity, which invariably, in a long career, you'll have acute moments of adversity, post financial crash, whatever the whether it's external or internally caused. And so I think that's that's, but they all are very different types of interactions.
Yeah.
And again, I think managing down is it's something that comes again with maturity, right? And
skill, because some people are mature in age and aren't modeling the behaviors for managing down well through adversity.
I think one of the things that I've had to learn is how much how important positive reinforcement is for people. So, and doing that in a way that's consistent with also driving performance. And so I've learned that honesty, even when you have to have difficult conversations, is very important. Integrity and building trust. And you build trust with people in a number of ways. I think they respond really well in general if they think you're someone by which to which fairness matters, right? And that you have a high degree of integrity around fairness, and being transparent and open. I'm sort of prone to overshare a little bit with my direct reports, and I've walked the line in the past. At trusting. I'm very, very trusting of people. I've built, I'm innately sort of optimistic and a trusting person. And I think over my career, it has come back to bite me at points in time, where I've ended up feeling naive or stupid for trusting. But I think net and on balance, it has really, really, been a massive benefit and paid dividends for me to be a trusting person. And you have to trust your instincts when you're hiring people, for example, and putting people in the role. You have to provide the guardrails. But I've noticed that people respond really well to, and people who are good at their job and they're ambitious and they want to get ahead. They need to feel they want to feel empowered. They want to feel that they have control or that they have influence over what it is they're doing. They don't want to be micromanaged, right?
Yeah.
And so trust is a really important element. And you can guide and steer them better if you have that trust, because you've got a safe environment by which you can have a hard conversation.
Correct. Yeah.
I've had conversations where, I've had to say, this isn't working out in the way it's supposed to, like this. Let's talk about it. This is, what you need to do, or I think you're in the wrong job. Why don't we change your role? I think, and I've when I've recognized talent, but it's not quite a fit for the role that person's in, I've been quite successful in repurposing people into other roles in which they've thrived. But it does all come down to trust and honesty and sharing, listening, and then sharing your thought processes, and making that a two-way exchange. Is how it's worked best. Yeah.
I just love the way you zoomed in on trust, because trust actually is the currency of the moment. Everybody's talking about trust, and it is just so key. But what I found really interesting what you said there is, yes, it is the most important thing to do is to build that trust, but it comes with its own little things. It's not always just up with trust. As you say, sometimes you trust people and you do it wrongly, and you end up in a bad place because you've trusted people and you've overshared and so on. But net, the results are absolutely there to move the relationship forward if you can build that trust.
Yeah, and I heard the intentionality as well to build those trusting relationships so that you can. People get the sense that you have their backs rather than that you're on their backs.
Yes.
So even when you have those tough messages to deliver, this isn't working well, we need to do this differently, you're not in the right job, they know that you're coming from a place where you still have their backs. You just need to be honest and face the elephant in the room and what's going on.
Yes.
And also love the way you describe culture, because that's the way we describe it as well, that it's a collection of behaviors. And so if you want to change the culture, there's some behaviors that you need to change to get a different result. I don't know where I was going with that. I just loved what you said and wanted to pick up on it. How would you advise a woman now wanting to progress their career in financial services or, some similar professional environment where the mindset might not, even decades later, might not quite be where bankers trust is, or was back then, in seeing the real benefit of having strong female presence in leadership? What advice would you give for career progression for women now?
Yeah, I mean, I think financial services is a good example because women are still woefully underrepresented.
Yeah, still struggling for 30%, aren't we?
Yeah, woefully underrepresented in senior roles. And I think a lot of that is that the homogeneity of those, organizations sort of culturally is sort of self-perpetuating. Now, saying all of that, huge advances have been made. And there's probably no better time than now than there ever has been to be a woman entering in financial services. But I think that the advice I would have is, so it's a great time. There's a real awareness, and there is real intentionality in almost every firm around creating more diversity in the workforce, right? So I think it is now an accepted truth that more diverse workforces, diversity of background, of ethnicity, of gender, are more effective, right?
Yeah.
And that having a collection of different viewpoints is much more effective if it can work together in the right way than having sort of a homogeneous tribe, of groupthink. So I think that's now an accepted wisdom. And I think most companies have got some form of initiative in place, or soft objective, hard objective to improve that. And, there have been various, changes as well, in terms of things like shared parental leave. and changes in now, I mean, maybe it's just through economic adversity that less and less women have the choice of opting out of the workplace.
Yeah.
And there's just so many more dual income families than there ever were before. There's many more female breadwinners, where the woman is the main breadwinner in the family than ever before. So it has never been a better time, and the changes are really welcomed. And I think people are really beginning to pay attention to it. The Women in Finance Charter, we see just about every RFP that we get in from the bigger investors, and particularly in the US, actually interesting, have questions on DE&I, diversity and inclusion, representation of different groups within the workplace, etc. So there's a real awareness of it now. Now that doesn't always translate into reality when you're in the coalface of things, right? And I think my advice would be, it's a great time, but pick your environment carefully, right?
True.
Because not all environments are equal in that regard.
Yeah.
And so, the old adage, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I think you need to really identify a broader culture to make it an easier starting point. It doesn't mean that as you build your confidence and get more experienced as a woman in financial services, that you can't go in to very, different and more homogenous and difficult cultures and thrive and be the change agent and all of that. But it isn't an environment I'd want to start in as a junior woman, for example, right? I would look for, I would be very, very careful. That would be my advice. And there are many, many organizations that have worked very hard at that and have delivered that. And then I would look for the right sponsorship, right? And I was super lucky with the right sponsorship. And, whether I'd been, a man or a woman, I would have had that sponsorship, in my first job, in the two partners, one that I reported directly to initially, and one that was, I never reported directly to, but was, very influential in the part of the bank that I worked in, that were just real believers in me. And they made me feel that they believed in me, and that they gave me more and more responsibility, and they put a lot of trust in me with, important profit centers for the bank. And they told me I could do it, even when I doubted myself, right? They gave me that confidence. So I was very, very lucky at the beginning of my career. I had a very, I did have some harrowing experiences as well when I think back to some of the craziness, but it wasn't traumatizing to me because I had that air cover and I had that sponsorship. And in fact, there was one particular very harrowing event that happened to me, and I'm not going to go into the details of it in this conversation, but I was able to literally pick up the phone to the partner in New York. I was in London at the time, and say, "This has happened. This has happened," and I was fairly distraught at what had happened, and within 20 minutes, he had called me back. And he was, in the back of a car going to JFK to jump on the next Concorde to come over and sort it out with the head of HR. So I had that level of sponsorship, and that was very valuable to me. I wished I'd appreciated it more at the time. I'm still in touch with one of those partners. In fact, the last time was only a few years ago. Maybe it was before COVID now, when I was in Australia. I went to some big benefit with him. As his guest. And he still calls me kiddo, but
the relationship continues.
I was going to say, you don't get through a career, 30, 40 years, into 30 plus years into it now, as a woman in finance, without coming across some obnoxious people, obnoxious guys who have very outdated views and so on. Clearly, you were very blessed to have that, as you say, sponsor who was able to address one of those challenges. Any other tips if you don't have that kind of sponsor in place? If you're talking to
is what it sounds like.
It sounds like
seek one out, seek mentors.
Seek mentors.
Yeah, it's about networking. It's about internal networking and external networking, and I think that that's something that doesn't come naturally to women. right?
Mhm.
We are real people pleasers. We are very, I must deliver. And I'll tell you a funny story. Actually, this was at back at Hermes, and I came to and I won't say the desk to protect the people's identity.
Uh-huh.
It was one of the desks that worked for me, and there was sort of 8 people on this desk, and there was a head of who worked for me, and then there was a number of people underneath that, and there were 2 very talented individuals at that level. Who I would have a debate with my direct report as to which would be the best succession planning for him out of
Right.
those 2 people. And one was a man and one was a woman. And they were both amazing, brilliant, lovely, really good at their jobs, hardworking. And I kept passing at lunchtime and noticing the woman just toiling away. You know, they were always very busy. The workload was huge. And I would say, where's XYZ? You know, as in her male colleague.
Mm.
And she said, oh, well, he's out having lunch with, a bunch of his mates from BlackRock or wherever he'd worked before, just having burgers and finding out what's going on in the industry. And I said, why don't you do that? And she said, yeah, but I've got to do this and I've got to do this project for you here, Harriet. And I've got to. And I said, no, but this is part of your job.
Yeah.
Right. She sort of looked at me and I said, no, I want you to organize a lunch with, mates, ex-colleagues, whoever it is, external, or get off the desk, go to an event. There's lots of things you can go. I want you to do that at least once every 2 weeks. Right.
Mm.
And she's like, really? But, and I said, well, he's doing it.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
I said, that will serve him really well in his career. Right. And even the way and I don't know why it is, but it's something quite innate that, and I'm just going to say it, but I think men are better networkers, right?
Mhm.
They understand very quickly, the wolf pack, what's the pecking order? How do I navigate that? How do I, whereas women, we're just lost, right? And especially when you're in an environment that is predominantly men. It's very intimidating, right? You can't have the conversation about the football game or the rugby game or, go and play golf or whatever it is. You're excluded from a lot of the common
The
language.
in
Right?
club.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so you have to make a very deliberate effort to find ways,
Yeah.
and that's why female networks are, with more and more women. You've got, use the women if that's more comfortable. Seek out the women's networks. There's women in powerful positions that will form your mentors, your sponsors,
Mhm.
that might feel more accessible, but don't exclude men. Learn from what men are doing innately that works. Don't turn yourself into a man because we
Yeah.
want men
Absolutely not,
and
yeah.
women. You want both of those. We are both very different, the
Yeah.
genders. And you want both of that. My ideal world would be to have a team that was 50-50. When you get to 30% of women, it's when you stop noticing, the gender divide at all,
Yeah.
and things start working together in a much more natural way. And men want that too, right? So I would say it's that it's about seeking those people out and working hard on building networks. And even now I'm not as good at it as I should be, and I have to make a very conscious effort. But the women's networks now are becoming very powerful. And I was at an event recently that one of the top New York headhunters in our space, led by a woman. I'll shout her out, Sasha Jensen Partners, and you might know her, but she's very, very, very a real advocate of building diversity and of, female empowerment in financial services. And she had an event in London, and it wasn't exclusively for women, but because of who she is and because of her building out her female network, there was a lot of very senior and powerful women there. And it was probably the balance was sort of 60-40 female to male.
Okay.
And I just realized immediately how much easier that was to navigate, to make connections, to find, and that's natural, right?
Yeah.
And then it makes you realize how hard it is when you're so outnumbered.
Yeah.
It is much harder. And, it's not like people are deliberately excluding you. That's not what I'm saying, or that the system's rigged against you, but it is just much harder for you. And I remember chatting with, a man who was at that same event, and he said, wow, this must be what you guys feel like all the time. When you go to, Super Return in Berlin or something, and it's like,
Yeah.
this must be, I've just felt like what it must feel like for you. I don't know how you guys do it.
I hope he carries that
Exactly.
sense of feeling very different and very outnumbered with him into his male-dominated spaces to bring more women along in a more powerful way.
Yes.
There is so much more that we
There's
could
so much
talk
more we could
about.
say. I was just going to say on that point, I could say, as a black man in financial services for the last 30 years, I identify with that. I mean, just going into a room and just feeling outnumbered, but just going anyway. And I guess kind of that's just what we have to do.
And
Yes.
so, as women, and as then you can
Minorities
take it
of
to
any.
a black woman in that space, and it's just for all of us to develop the awareness that our natural tendency is to find our tribe.
Yes.
And if you go into a space and there isn't enough of your tribe, whatever that tribe is, you're gonna feel
Yeah.
outnumbered, unsafe, a lot more cautious. And those who are represented in stronger numbers need to be the one to help pull you in.
Yes.
to
Ironically, it's
safety.
as having had the experience of being vastly outnumbered as the minority, you're the one who, as you get more senior, that notices more
Yes.
those people that are feeling excluded in a
Yeah.
situation. And
Yeah.
I make it my business to try and look out for it,
Yeah.
and to
Because
try
you
and
know what it feels like.
yeah. Or even
Yeah.
if you're in a meeting, when you go into those meetings and there's sort of 6 people from each organization, and there's someone there that's the clear, sort of odd one out in terms
Yeah.
of the tribe. But they're there, and they're being endorsed, by their firm.
Yeah.
But you can feel they don't feel easy, and I always make a particular point. I try and make a particular point of, singling them out in a positive way, and
Mm.
and they
Bringing
might
them
be
in.
because they're the most junior person in the room as well, or
Mm.
Yeah.
and being the most junior person in a room can feel a bit scary as well, right? When you're young.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Harriet, there is so much more that we could explore, but we're conscious of time. I want to ask one last question. We spoke a lot about work relationships and, the sponsoring, which was amazing to
Yeah.
just hear the difference that made in your career. What other relationships have helped to support you in being the best version of yourself and, enabling you to progress to the dizzying heights of power that you now hold in financial services?
Yeah, well, it's friends and family, really, right?
Yeah.
It's the really important relationships. So, starting at home, when you've got a very big and demanding job, you need a very understanding partner. We've always played in my marriage. It's always been a case of pass the baton. I took 6 or 7 years out of extended maternity leave when I was having my children, where my husband was sort of taking the lead on the career front, and then when it became my turn, when I was offered the job to build out the Hermes business, and at that point in time, my husband did ask me. He said, well, haven't you had enough? This is going to be challenging in our home situation. I said, you need to be on board. And I said, but I feel there's unfinished business, and I would like to have a go at this. And he was very supportive. It definitely took, it was an adaptive process. When suddenly I'd been working much more flexibly. I ran my own business before. And so I had much more flexibility to contribute to all of the home aspects of our life,
Yeah.
whether it's administrating your life or dealing with the school. And suddenly he had to do more of that because he was working much more flexibly and had, a lot more slack. And there was definitely a sort of period of adjustment as we adjusted to the new normal. But he's been supportive. And then I think it's been, my parents, obviously, my parents are always, a source of advice and guidance to me, and they've always been interested in my career. And they're older and wiser. And so in terms of navigating the politics and the people dynamics and, guiding me to exert restraint at times and to learn how to change gears rather than be on full on Harriet mode the whole time. And, you don't have to win every battle, those sorts of advices, think about the war, not the battle. And then friends. So, close friends that have similar career experiences have been invaluable because again, they help bring measure. Sometimes when you're venting and you're fuming and you've got smoke coming out of your ears, and they help you proportionalize or bring things back into proportion. No, this is fine. You can let this one go. You can, and help you navigate the chessboard, and also give you that advice to back to this, be curious, don't let conflicts fester. You guys have I really, the 4 habits training that we did, I still think back to that. I always think of that, be curious, rather than, sort of don't assume things, be curious. And I have actually put that into action at various points in time. So
great.
So friends and family, those close inner circles, the ones that I talked about at the beginning, the family, and then the self-selecting group of people, are the ones that can help you leverage their own experiences and their own, greater maturity in the case of your parents, to navigate those relationships.
Amazing.
Mentors, coaches, all sorts of people around
and
you.
Friends. Yeah.
Wonderful.
There's more we could ask, but I think
so much more.
We'll stop
As you
it
were
there.
speaking, I made so many notes of things I could have picked up on, but it's been really great having you on, Harriet. Thank you so much. I knew there was going to be a whole lot of wisdom, and you absolutely showed that.
Totally delivered. Any last piece of advice relationally, or anything that you want to leave, anything you wanted to share that you've not been able to share as we wrap up?
Yeah, always be true to yourself, right? Sometimes, and that does mean sometimes you have to face difficult situations or conflict, even managing up, which is the harder one to do. So be true to yourself and be honest, and don't be afraid to trust, because you will have some war stories along the way because of that, but net the impact will be greater and more positive.
Love that. Net, go for trust.
Go for trust.
Awesome. Thank you, Harriet. It's been a pleasure. And who knows, maybe we'll arrange another one. So much more we could talk about, but we thoroughly enjoyed our conversation together.
Yeah, I enjoyed it a great deal. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you. Thank you both, Jonathan and Andrea. Thanks.
So as we wrap up, we say goodbye to our listeners around the world and see you in the next episode.
Yeah.
So now it's bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed that episode. And if you did, and you want to hear more, the best thing to do is subscribe. Then you'll never miss an episode. There's a new one every Friday. You can stay connected with us on social media at The 4 Habits for updates, behind-the-scenes content, and to participate in discussions related to the show. We always love to hear from you. And of course, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review on your preferred platform to allow us to reach more listeners and help people around the globe radically transform the way they do relationships, so they too can enjoy better harmony at home, thrive at work, and win at life.